In my most recent video talking about component-based learning, I thought I'd go over one of the projects I work on where I just didn't take that approach. And I in fact had one video of it, which was recreating Stardew Valley with Odin and Raylib. And I had one episode that was 25 minutes long, so it's pretty chunky. And was working on it after this video, but I really stopped after I realized I had a few issues. I hadn't really properly planned it out. It wasn't actually a thing I was looking to sell. It was just something to learn from, like rebuilding Stardew Valley, like an aspect of it. It was specifically meant to be just the farming part into Odin and Raylib. And like I said in my video about doing component based, how it can all go perfectly fine until you hit that dead end. That's kind of what happened with this. And because I had no clear goal of what the end goal was I wanted for this, is that I did hit that dead end and was like, where do I take this now? The game isn't going to be any really fun because I only wanted to do the farming part. It was just going to be sort of that type of. It was just going to, you grew crops and then you did nothing with it, sell it, or just move on. So I'm going to evaluate why this went wrong, and we're going to look through the code and we're going to look through the actual game itself. So let's first just launch it, and boom, here's our world where I last had it in the state. You can see that we still have the usual world, and we had lots of foliage, added grass. The collision was, I remember, a bit janky because I hadn't actually put any perfect collision, but you can see that the player has a hotbar. They have like 4 different states. There also is meant to be a currency up top, 500. That's as far as I got of that. And there may have been a store, but I can switch to different modes, so I can destroy foliage, sorry, and then I can then hoe the grounds like this, which was cool, very cool. And then I could plant crops like this, or just whatever crop I had hard coded selected, and then you could then increase the growth like this, which is awesome, which is cool. Also, there is some cool features, like for example, the green is where it's in my place radius, and then red's out of range. So as you see, I move closer, it then gets into focus. There is also sound effects, and if I turn it on, there you go, you can hear it for a bit. And this sound was like I got some BBC sounds of some background noise of like animals and wildlife, and I used a piece of software which would create a loop of that, so it'd find the best place to loop, and then it would automatically loop. And so this will just keep looping in the background, so it adds a bit of atmosphere. When the player's at the edge of the map, I had some cool things, like, so this is the world was just an island for now, and if you were at the edge, it would actually render like a sea instead of just like nothingness, which I thought was really cool. And I did have some form of inventory. You see here that the player was meant to be able to buy like seeds. So like if I have broccoli, you can see it increases. I could buy asparagus, and I have this page, and I go back. Very cool and press, and if I open it, it'll be like, but I don't think you couldn't, like, I hadn't changed it so you could select a crop. I hold the ground again, then plant. Yeah, it just plants whatever this was, like lettuce or something. So that was the final state of the game. As you see, I really like the style of it. I really love that tile set I was using, and I it's in my back catalogue. I don't want to abandon it. I learned a lot from it, but it had no direction. It didn't have a very good plan. If I had more planning, then I would be obviously be going through it and adding features so much more easily and much more confidently. And with now my component based approach, I would now plan it, because I would also have to plan. I realized that actually, I need that inventory system, and I need that purchasing system. I need that day and night cycle. I need the collision, etc., etc. The big thing, which I mentioned like in the components video, was stuff like inventory, how it actually seems very trivial, especially from a user's perspective. It's just like a screen that shows you your items and then you just drag them around. But from a programming point of view, it's very difficult to implement because you have to do all the sorting and all the manipulating, etc., etc. And that's what happened with this system I had. I did in fact have an inventory system. If we zoom here, so this was the traditional show inventory. I think I labeled it old inventory because I didn't no longer use it. I was like, there's no need to have the player doesn't need an inventory. They just need to be able to grow crops. I got rid of it. All it would do was just add items. You couldn't actually move anything out for now, and it was obviously difficult because you had to have an inventory and you had to check. So if I go into the inventory .odin, it would check. You had to have a structure of some sort. So the item package, which was then here, so it's getting more complex, and this is what an item would look like. You had to check, is it stackable, which is booming brand new, its inventory position, its seeds. I think that was the count for the quantity. There's a quantity, a description, a name, and then its unique ID. And it was one for each item. And I was just like, God, am I gonna have to add it for every fruit and vegetable? But I guess I would have, unless I could have probably perhaps automated it somehow. If we go to the fruit and vegetables, look how many different options there are just for the icons. That's not including the fruit trees were in the game. The obviously the plants. Here, yeah, the crops as well. So that it would have been a lot of effort. As much as I love this tile set, and I was there like, what do I try and add all these? I mean, look at them all. I also had to try and guess which is which. So if we zoom in, yeah, you had like things like tomatoes, which were quite obvious, but it was like here, which is I was not too sure whether it was like a cabbage or a broccoli. So these ones is that I think that's supposed to be romaine lettuce. Is that cabbage or is this lettuce? I assume this is also lettuce. So it was like difficult trying to name things. I probably should have just chosen the right one, or I should say not the right one, the ones I can obviously name. Another mistake is that all these things are in. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it. Are in their own like package, an Odin package that I can port. So like a Python package if you're not familiar. That was, initially from the like before starting that made sense because I don't want like variables reading each other or functions be able to read variables that aren't associated with it. And I thought it'd make the code more organized, but it really doesn't. For a small project, it just makes things more complicated because you make sure they return values and trying to retain value, and then you want like this needs to read that variable that's in this package, and then you can end up getting a package loop. So that one's recalling this package and that one's recalling that package. When in fact, it's just easier just not to use any packages and have them all in the main package, and then they can just read it. And then when you name your variables, you can just put then like an abbreviation to it. So this is player underscore position and stuff like that. The player's blah blah blah, or the prop, and then you always know it's going to be in that file or so and so. While it did fail, I still learned a huge amount, specifically in Odin, the specific language at the time, because I was still quite new to Odin, and so I picked up a lot of information with the way arrays work, the maps, dictionaries, and sorting. So with the sorting, it was this array called tiled layers, and this is the sorting with the background, so the way the world looks and how it looks all smooth and it all interconnects perfectly, was this like layer structure which had its like, the tile it should be, and then its bit, because I'm using a bit mask. I actually had a whole tutorial on this that you can go view on how you can do this, and it was just the size of the world. And the reason it's like a 2D array is that when I'm joining edges, rather than have in my tile set and draw every single interconnecting difference, I just have them as transparent backgrounds. So this corner one with the water, it's actually two tiles. One is, it's like loading, it's two layers, so there's the grass, and then you also have the water that are connected to it. So that's how you get those smooth transitions. And it also, of course, updates in real time, like we saw. So if I hold the ground, we can see that it updates dynamically. And I had it pretty optimized, so it would go through it would first check if there was an element actually existed there, then add it, and it was also check if that auto tile bit was just zero, so you wouldn't get like, right, if I loop through every tile order, so there's 4 different combinations, and if I just looped through and added it and said, this is 0, that means it's not going to render anything, and that means for every tile in the world, it would do 4 different loops of renderings. That would take up huge compute resources, so in this case it would mitigate it as much as possible, with the worst case scenario being 4, but I don't think that 4 would even be possible, so the average would probably be about 2 or 3, depending on if there's tiles neighbouring or not. Another was with the foliage. I had actually 2 arrays. I had the one which had all the tile information, and the plant type, its growth stage, it's if you could walk through it or not, the tile, what it was, and its position in XY. And I also had this sorted position because if the player was in front of a tree which was a height of 2, that when they walked behind it, they would obviously need to be rendered behind the thing. And so this was just its dynamic int, and it was of each position, and it would be of all sort, because they couldn't be duplicate. You couldn't have 2 tiles, 2 like foliage on the same tile at the same time. And so when it came to actually rendering the player would I'd actually insert the player's position like a binary search or insertion short, so it would find their position in the map and means I can know if I could render below or not. And this actually reduced computation, and I only ever had to sort the array when the world had been edited. It also only shows textures around the player, which I've had them before, which was not too difficult, which was a very cool. I do like that. That does a huge amount of optimization rather than rendering the whole world, and this binary search as well. I really like that implementation and the way it renders all the foliage in the correct order. But this only works because none of the assets are moving. If the assets were moving, that would be a completely different story, because that means you have to sort those that array every frame or every time someone moved. But because they only moves when the player moves and when the player edits the foliage, meaning that I only need to resort the array if an edit was made, so the player destroys the world. So in fact, it's actually in here. See here, like text of the real the stage, and then it does another a nice little heap sort, which is inbuilt with own, which is nice. So again, back at this, if I were to reevaluate it and realize that maybe, hey, cut out the inventory here and chest storage, have it with something very basic. Collision, obviously, that was completely fine already. Farm up, we did okay in. Farming day and night cycle should have really thought about and planned that ahead. So done a sort of growth mechanic in its own component-based situation. So my new project, so much better because I planned it so much better. I have things that I've done in components that I implemented, things like the collision. I did this in its own component that's in its own GitHub file, which is nice. I also have this Pathfinder, which I learned. I actually ported from Python into this language, and I learned how to use that. That is in its own package because it's very, like I said, it was so abstract that I could just now use it and implement it in other areas. All I need to do is give it the array of zeros and ones. So 0 and 1 is a navigatable path. 1 is a wall that whoever is can't navigate, and it'll spit out an array of the path that the thing needs to go to, or whatever the enemy player. So I started doing this before I'd written any code for this project. If I remember, I planned it. I was like, I know I'm going to need a pathfinding algorithm to actually build this game, so I should probably learn that before I actually start it. Like with the last issue, the LPC Valley, which is my nickname for it, the Stardew Valley clone, I didn't really plan it. I was like, I'm just going to make a farming game. I vaguely know I'm going to need these. But when I actually came to it, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to take some effort. I don't even know how I'm going to use them. Like, what's the purpose of having an inventory? What are the player good? Do they need that? Like, do they need infinite inventory? Are they going to buy stuff? So I don't plan that. But this one's like, I know I'm going to need any pathfinding. They're going to have to find the player's position one way or to the building. So, and there was no real pathfinding repository and package. There was someone who did have an A-stamp, but it wasn't really what I wanted. I wanted it so I just feed it the array of the map and it would spit out the path. I also already had the tile map system that I used in the previous one, so I did actually also take the code from that and abstract it alongside the collision one, so I can just reuse it again. And so the progress on this project so far has been so much more smoother than before, and I have a clear direction where I want to. I know I need to do this, and I know how I can do this, and this. And these components also make for a good tutorial. They're just nice and bite-sized easy. You just go over that specific feature that someone wants to implement, and then they can just add it into the game. And I just provide the GitHub code of it, so if you can open it, here it is, then they can just read through. It's just like, it's a single file pretty much of the collision that they all need, and they can just look at it, learn it, and implement it themselves, or port it to whatever language they want. So, what's your experience with your past project failures? It's a good idea to look back at it retrospectively, see where you went wrong, and see how you learned from those situations, and how you've then improved on it, or how you're currently in a situation where maybe you're stuck. And do comment down below, and also subscribe and check out for my other content.